Hello and welcome to the City Rev Life podcast. My name is Justin. I'm here with Robey, and we're excited to have this conversation with you today. Each week on the City Rev Life podcast, we feature conversations about what it means to live like Christ in a modern culture, how to navigate relationships and friendships, and also to equip you to make a difference in your cities. Now, before we get started, I want to remind you that you can subscribe to our channel. You can subscribe to our podcast as well, whether you listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen, you can subscribe there so that you get episodes weekly. As they're uploaded, you can have them right there on your device, ready to go. And so for today's topic, Robey, why don't you share a little bit about what we're going to be discussing and what we're going to spend our time on?
Yeah, so throughout the last several episodes, in the last several weeks and months, we've been talking about these key relationships in our life, really the home relationships. So maybe you live with your siblings or roommates or your spouse or your family, maybe you have kids. Whatever those home relationships, those are those core key relationships in your life. And we're talking about just navigating those and having those healthy relationships. And so we've been using as our guide the fruit of the Spirit. And just as a reminder, the fruit of the Spirit, these are the things, this is how I explain it to my kids. If you plant an apple seed, you get an apple tree. If you plant in someone's heart the Jesus seed, you get a Jesus tree. So in other words, the fruit in our life is Jesus fruit. Yeah. And there's a list of 9 facets of the fruit. The fruit, there's one fruit, it's singular. The importance of that is this is not like a list of spiritual gifts or a personality gifting where it's like
a menu.
Yeah, it's not a menu where I'm good at some of these, I'm not good at some of these. I'm good at joy, I'm not good at self-control, or I'm good at kindness, but I'm not good at love. You know, whatever it would be. All of these things are being produced in our lives. And so we're kind of taking these aspects of the fruit of the Spirit, and we're kind of laying them one at a time over these core relationships. So that's kind of what we've been talking a lot about. And today we're talking about patience.
Patience. Everybody's favorite, patience. Long suffering.
Yep.
Long suffering.
Is how it's talked about long suffering.
Long suffering.
Yeah.
Patience. That's the King James, right?
Yeah, long suffering. I think, yeah, long suffering. Yeah, patience is, in fact, the Hebrew way they talked about patience, especially of God, is that long suffering. The actual literal Hebrew is long of nose.
Yes.
And I think the idea there is, if you think of like a cartoon character who's huffing and puffing, like their nostrils are flaring.
Steam coming out
of the nostril.
Anger.
Yeah. And so the idea there is it takes a long, long time for God to be huffing and puffing out of his
slow to anger.
He's slow to anger. Yeah, exactly. So it is hard to have patience. And I think of all of the aspects of the fruit of the Spirit, man, with these home relationships, these key relationships, patience can be one of the hardest things.
Yeah, the people at home, you see the good, the bad, the ugly, you see everything. And so because of that, it can be more challenging to exercise patience with the people that we love, the people that we spend all this time with. Yeah. So let's dig in a little bit, talk about what we mean in terms of patience in the context of family relationships.
Yeah, I think we intuitively know, all of us, what patience is. We certainly know what impatience is, but let's just kind of, just for our ease of discussion, just kind of give a crisp definition. When I think of patience, I think of restfully waiting. You know, like there's waiting where you're just kind of tapping your fingers, you know, like you're just, you know, okay, come on. You know, but restfully waiting. Sometimes we're forced to wait. We don't actually have control over waiting, but restfully waiting. It can be restfully waiting, like in a timeline. Hey, everyone get in the car. You know, the train's leaving. You know, everyone get in the car. We're leaving right now. You know, it could be that kind of thing. Or it could be a roommate or a spouse or a sibling that's going through a long, difficult season and just bearing their burdens with them and bearing with them in love. It's restfully waiting on that person. And so we can talk about patience maybe in another podcast about patience towards God, but today we're talking about really that restfully waiting with others in our lives.
Yeah, I think for most people listening or watching this, we can almost universally agree patience is challenging. And we are so prone towards impatience. What are some of the things that you think trigger that? What pokes that bear?
I mean, a lot of things, and we'll talk about that, but I think one thing in particular impatience flows out of our heart, and there's some things in our heart that lead to impatience, and we'll get to that in a second. But something that can inflame impatience, or it can trigger it or amplify it, is when I'm going through pain. So when I'm stressed, and I think, if you're stressed, I think it'd be easiest to put it like this. Like, it's not hard to see when a parent is stressed. Maybe it's financial stress, work stress, marriage stress. There's a capacity for patience, like with their kids, or if it's work stress with their friends and family. Like, there's something about pain or stress or anxiety that really lessens our capacity for patience. And I think what that is when I feel pain draws my focus and attention inward. I'm very aware of my stress. I'm very aware of my own circumstances. I'm very aware of my own, it might be literal chronic pain. Like, I'm very aware of my own pain. And those kinds of things, pain, stress, and anxiety, draws my attention inward. I can be very consumed with my own pain or stress and anxiety. And that fundamentally works against my ability to have patience.
Yeah.
And really, I think that gets to what is the essence of patience. Is impatience is being self-absorbed. It's a type of self-absorption. Impatience is, I have my timetable that works for me. Either like, with God, it's like, God, why aren't you, this was my time I wanted my career to be here. I wanted to be married by now. I wanted to have kids by now. I was expecting them to have grandkids. I was expecting to be retired. I was expecting to have this kind of finances. I was expecting this. I have my timetable. God, you're not working according to my timetable. That would be impatience with God. But the same with other people. Oh, my boss, why hasn't he done this yet? Or why hasn't, my spouse done this? Or why can't my spouse get through this? Or why is my roommate still stuck here? Why can't my kids learn this by now? Or why can't these people get to this place? It's other people not being on my timetable, and it's me being self-absorbed with my own timetable. And essentially, impatience versus patience is a matter of empathy. It kind of comes down to empathy. Am I holding everyone to what the timetable that I identify with and that I associate with myself and that's best for me? Or can I be empathetic that other people have their own things going on in their life? They have their own backgrounds. They have their own issues. Can I stop and imagine what the pain or what the difficulty is that they're going through, or what's in their background or in their makeup or in their stage of life that might be leading to where they are? Patience with other people requires empathy for where they're at in their life. Yeah. It could be maybe you're a leader at work and you're struggling to have patience with those that you're leading. Ultimately, empathy helps you have patience. So that's ultimately what patience is I think impatience is being kind of self-absorbed and dialed in on my own timeline exclusively, but having patience requires empathy. With others.
So then, in the context of the fruit of the Spirit, let's talk through, why would we expect something like patience, that virtue of being long-suffering, of being able to get outside of ourselves, empathize, and be, restfully waiting as others are going through their challenges or as others are on their own journey where they're struggling? Why would we expect that to be an outflow or a fruit of the Spirit at work in someone's life?
Yeah, and I think that's so important. I like that you're keeping us grounded to the fruit of the Spirit as patience. Patience is not just one of those nice things I should add into my life. Yeah. Patience is when the gospel seed is taking root in my life, it should naturally, by the power of the Holy Spirit, produce patience. So every Christian who has the gospel and holding to the gospel, re-preaching the gospel to themselves every day, like standing firm on the gospel, patience should be an outflow. Why is that? Because the gospel essentially uproots self-righteousness. So the gospel says there's nothing that I can do to save myself. I stand spiritually bankrupt before God. So I need a savior. I'm not looking at my own righteousness and beating my chest saying, look at me, God, now you should let me into heaven. No, I am desperate for God. So it uproots my self-righteousness. And self-righteousness is having self-righteousness, not uprooting the self-righteousness. That is a patience blocker. Self-righteousness leads to impatience because when I'm self-righteous, I say, look, why can't you just be like me? We look at our roommate. Why can't you just be like me? We look at our spouse. Why can't you just have the same times table as me? I look at my kids. Why can't they be like this? I look at the people I work with or whatever other relationship, and I am holding them to my timetable, and I'm assuming that my timetable is superior, and I'm assuming that I'm superior. Essentially, the gospel uproots self-righteousness, and the gospel uproots pride, because I have to humble myself to say, I need to be saved. I ultimately don't have anything to offer God in order to get to heaven. I need to be saved. And so the gospel should be breathing out this humility and should be starting to squelch my pride and uproot my pride. And again, patience is essentially humility. Impatience is a sense of pride. My timetable is superior, and everyone should apply to my timetable. But here's the thing about pride. Pride numbs us to having a self-awareness, because pride leads us to always have an inflated perspective of ourselves. We don't have the self-awareness to see our flaws. And so what we do is I have a higher opinion of myself than what is actually true if I have pride. And so then I'm holding people accountable to not where I actually am, but where I think I am. So I'm holding them to a false standard. I'm not even holding them accountable to where I actually am if I have pride. And pride numbs me to being able to see that reality. Well, the gospel is uprooting pride. It's uprooting self-righteousness. And out of that is flowing a humility. It's flowing a more realistic perspective of where I am and my limitations and flaws. And that is ripe soil to be open to other people's timetables, open to empathy towards other people, and open to how I have to people have to be patient with me. And so that all of those things, the gospel churns the soil, uproots pride and self-righteousness, and really helps kind of cultivate patience with other people.
Yeah, yes, that is so true. I think about the parable Jesus shares about, he talks about prayer. He says, two people went to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee or a scribe. And his prayer was something along the lines, God, I thank you I'm not like these sinners,
Right.
I thank you that I give more than they give, and I'm more obedient to the law than they are. And their entire prayer is like basically telling God how wonderful they are, not about how wonderful God is. And then the other person goes to pray, and this person is described as a sinner, and he goes to God and he says, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Basically say, God, be patient with me.
Yeah.
God, show mercy. I know what I deserve. Would you be slow to anger towards me? Show mercy towards me. And it's Spurgeon talks about that parable, and he says 2 people went to the temple to pray. Only one prayed.
Wow.
One basically wanted to try and brag to God. The self-righteousness that you're describing.
Right.
And the way it manifested was in this inflating of themselves that's actually not accurate.
Yeah.
To look down on someone else. So of course, if I'm self-righteous and I'm thinking you just need to get on my level, of course I'm going to be impatient towards the people around me rather than showing the patience that God has shown us. So let's get into the home relationship conversation. That's practically good. How does patience start to take root in these various dynamics, in these various relationships?
Yeah, so let's talk about these home relationships, and let's just start with roommates or siblings. It's that peer-to-peer kind of relationship. These are your closest friends, and ultimately, friendship is a commitment to one another, and we will have good friends that go through long, difficult seasons, and really what good friendship is walking along patiently with them when they, when there's no longer, if a friend is grieving or a friend is struggling with depression or a friend has chronic pain or, that friend is going to be different and no longer, there may be things I used to get out of that friendship that I no longer get. Like, man, I used to have so much fun, but every time I'm with them, they're struggling and it's hard now. Well, this is now an opportunity for patience. If I'm only in that friendship for what I get out of it, well, that's selfish. And so we have to be patient for siblings and for roommates and for key friends in our lives when they go through long seasons and have the expectation that to get the blessing and benefit of deep, rich, lifelong friendships, it's going to mean walking patiently through long seasons that might be wearying, and be patient through those. And so one is having that expectation. Two, with those roommates and siblings, is understanding a phrase that we use sometimes is hurting people hurt people. Mm-hmm. And so that goes two ways. So if I am the person that is going through a difficult season, if I go off to work and I have a lot of stress and I come home, I need to know, back to where I live with my roommates, I need to know that I'm hurting right now and I don't want to now bite their heads off. And so just understand that dynamic. And the same goes for the friend or roommate or sibling that you live with that's going through a difficult season. There's just times we got to absorb some from each other. And so just understanding that dynamic helps us be patient with each other. And within a friendship or relationship, there's a give and take. Mm-hmm. I need to be willing to be ministered to. Some people struggle to ever let a friend or roommate in to minister to them and be able to have the humility to say, hey, I'm having a hard time. Can you pray with me? Or, can you just be a listening ear? But we also need to do that for each other. And so that give and take, sometimes the best remedy for being self-consumed in my own pain is reaching out and helping another and listening to someone else, what someone else is going through. That often gives me perspective. And so I think those are a couple of the dynamics when thinking through patience with roommates and siblings.
Yeah. Let's talk about the category of parent-child relationships. And I think, we've primarily talked about this from the standpoint of what it looks like as a parent to be patient with your children, for parents to be patient with their teen, with their college age. But I think it also, the reverse applies too, especially as, if you're a high school student, college student, maybe you just graduated, but you're still living at home, or even if you don't live at home, what it looks like to be patient with your parents, or some of you who are listening who are, married, have children of your own, but you're having to be patient with your parents. That parent-child relationship, it does go both ways.
It does.
But what are some of the challenges, or how can we demonstrate patience in that parent-child relationship?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think let's start with you're the child and being patient with your parents. And it starts probably as a young adult. So all of a sudden your brain is literally coming to its final stages of development. I don't mean that in a,
to the teens listening, we're sorry.
Yeah,
but you're not fully developed.
No, and that's not meant to be like patronizing or anything. But a brain is developing in its final stage of developing into one's 20s, and so what happened? There's a dynamic that happens for young adults where all of a sudden they start seeing their parents through the lenses of an adult brain. And they become very aware of weaknesses. Yeah. And then they start processing through ways that weakness was hurtful to them. And there is it's sometimes a sharp resentment and an impatience towards those weaknesses. Mm-hmm. And there may be a lot of patience then that needs to be directed towards those parents on the part of their kids, because they may never see those things ever change in their parents. Yeah. And that may be a lifelong just learning to have patience with those things. But I also think of those whose parents are now becoming aged, and there comes a time when kids are now parenting their parents. Yeah. And I think can be for some of you listening, you're parenting still your kids and your parents. And there's a lot on you, and there's a lot of patience required. And I think that's a time to really, again, dig in and say, I'm honoring my parents, which is honoring the Lord. I am honoring my parents who at one point changed my diaper. And so, now I am caring for them. And it is really as hard as that is, it can be one of the hardest seasons of life to care for an aging parent. It's an act of worship. Yeah. And fundamentally, Jesus laid his life down, and there may be a lot of sacrifices you're making for your parents. And regardless of whether you have a good relationship or they were a good parent or not, there are probably ways that they sacrificed for you, at least to some degree. And it's an opportunity to honor them and serve them, which is a way that we are worshiping the Lord. And so press on and really lean on community and friendships as you're being patient with your aging parents. And also, we have to have patience with our kids. And sometimes...
Really? Do we?
We do, man. We do. So Justin and I have both worked with teens and both have little kids at home.
Yeah.
And
some of the spectrum.
With every new season of life, there is a new reason to have patience with adult children, teens, and with kids. And there's always reason. And I just think a key part of this is remember that they are in a stage of life that they're probably acting age appropriate for. And just when you look at that toddler, that 2 or 3 year old that is just defiant and you're just going out of your mind, like literally insane, just remember they're probably just need a parent, and that's kind of why I'm supposed to be here, you know?
That's right. Those moments are cues for us. Like, oh yeah, they can't just make it out in the world by themselves.
Yeah.
They need me, you know?
Yeah. And just try to, I know for me, there's times when with little kids, I am getting like very frustrated and I have to just stop and look at them and just look at how little they are. Like, I just look at like, wow, they have little hands and they have little feet and little faces. And I'm reminded they're little. They're supposed to act this way. Yeah. And so, but the last one I think we got to talk about before we wrap up this episode is spouses. And I just think sometimes we're the least prepared for the amount of patience we have to have towards our spouses. And I blame the fairy tales that Cinderella and Prince Charming get married and it says, and they lived happily ever after. Well, that's great. I mean, that's great for Cinderella and Prince Charming that they neither one of them ever got into a fight with each other. They were always happy. So neither of them had stress. They never had in-law issues. They never had chronic pain. They never went through a difficult season. Prince Charming never had identity issues with how he reigned over the kingdom. Cinderella, apparently her relationship with her stepsisters was all fine after that, because that is not the case of marriage. We're signing up to do the adventure of life. And inevitably there will be seasons where there's a miscarriage or there's a grief and you're reacting different than your spouse is, or there's a job loss and now there's an identity issue that it takes years to figure out, or there's a financial hit and there's stress and you handle that stress differently. There is an issue with one of the children, or maybe it's when you have children, or maybe when the children leave the house, or one of you retires, and again there's an identity issue and trying to process through all of that. There are long seasons. We are signing up for walking through seasons of patience and with our spouse. And our spouse is not going to respond in some of these seasons the way either we would, and we would not respond in some of the seasons the way our spouse would. And we're not going to be on each other's timetable. We are there to show patience to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And to kind of just wrap up this section where we're talking about spouses and patience, the story came to mind of Robert McQuilkin, which is actually a message that was in our Love Is series a few years ago.
Yeah.
An illustration that you shared about this man, Robert McQuilkin. He was the president of a Bible college, Columbia Bible College. And in March of 1990, he resigned from his position as president because his wife had Alzheimer's, and she was deteriorating. And it had gotten to the point for him where he realized, Muriel, his wife, that when he was absent, so when he would go off to work, she just started to get scared. She would be afraid. And so he realized when he's with her, even though the Alzheimer's is there, even though her mental capacities were deteriorating, she was at peace. But whenever he would leave, she would have anxiety. She would start searching for him. And so he gave this moving resignation announcement to the faculty and students of Columbia Bible College. And here's a little excerpt of what he said. I thought this was so beautiful and profound. He says, perhaps it would help you to understand if I shared with you what I shared at the time of the announcement of my resignation in chapel. The decision was made, in a way, 42 years ago when I promised to care for Muriel in sickness and in health till death do us part. So, As I told the students and the faculty, as a man of my word, integrity has something to do with it, but so does fairness. She has cared for me fully and sacrificially all these years. If I cared for her for the next 40 years, I would not be out of debt. Duty, however, can be grim and stoic, but there is more. I love Muriel. She's a delight to me. Her childlike dependence and confidence in me, her warm love, occasional flashes of that wit I used to relish so, her happy spirit and tough resilience in the face of her continual distressing frustration. I do not have to care for her. I get to. It's a high honor to care for so wonderful a person.
Wow.
And hearing that, I remember sitting in the auditorium, hearing that being described, and just being so moved at the way in which that commitment of love being expressed in patience for someone to walk away from a job in a position they love, be president of a college, to get to, not have to get to be with his wife as he watches her deteriorate. Talk about patience, and to do that with that sense of joy. That's the Spirit brought gift. That's the fruit of the Spirit right there.
Yeah. And maybe just in closing, I would just say to spouses, we often don't think about pride and humility within a marriage, but we can have self-righteousness towards a spouse, and we can have pride towards a spouse, but have the humility to not hold your spouse to an inflated view of yourself, and to have what Dr. McQuilkin demonstrated, to have the realization that she had been patient for him for so many years and served him, and have, I'm so glad you brought that illustration up, Justin, to have the humility to empathize with your spouse and to realize you have been called. You're not called to a fairy tale. You're called to something so much greater and better than a fairy tale. Happily ever after is boring. Nothing changes. You are called to an adventure ever after with your spouse. And walking through that with them is the high honor of what marriage is. But it's going to require humility and patience.
Yeah. That's good. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the City Rev Life podcast. We hope that this was a blessing to you. Maybe there's someone in your life that you thought of as you were listening. Maybe it is the roommate, the spouse, child, parent, someone in your life that you think would benefit from this conversation. We'd love for you to share it with them and let them know how they can engage with us here on the City Rev Life podcast. Well, that's all for today. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Take care.
Thank you for joining us on City Rev Life. You can subscribe to this podcast, rate and review wherever you're listening to this. And we love it when you share it with your friends on social media. For more videos and content, go ahead and check us out at cityrev.org/podcast or download our City Rev Church app. Have a great day.